I'm Dr. Andrew Parker, and I'm the Associate Professor of Oboe at the Butler School of Music.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down. We appreciate you coming here, and you've got a lot of exciting things going on. You just released an album.
That's right.
A couple months ago. You've got another recording coming out. You've got some interesting performances coming. So that'd be great just to sit down and talk a little bit. So how are you doing?
I'm doing great. We're actually in the midst of audition season right now,
yes,
which I really, really love. I love getting to meet all the both kind of high school level students, the prospective undergrads, but also the prospective graduate students who are coming in from all kinds of different parts of the country and beyond, and just getting to know, what their artistic goals are and, the sorts of things they've picked up during the course of their undergrad in terms of like what's important to them as musicians and people and players and where they see themselves 5, 10, 15 years. It's just amazing the amount of variety I get to experience when I meet all these students.
That's awesome. Do you have any recommendations? Like what makes a successful audition for prospective students?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, actually. And I think there's a number of things that you can do even prior to the audition that can really set you up for success. Because,
like practice?
Well, yeah, exactly. Preparing the music definitely helps. But also, starting to establish a relationship with a professor that you're interested in potentially working with. A lot of the students that audition for me have contacted me, sometimes 2 years prior to them taking the audition, and asked to come take a lesson in person or take a lesson virtually. I also offer just virtual meetings with students where we just discuss the program. And sometimes we end up just chit-chatting about reed making and our favorite composers and what we struggle with in our process and in our practicing. And from my point of view, if I've already started to establish a rapport with a student, then I'm going to have a much better sense of what kind of energy they're going to bring into the studio, which is something I'm extremely mindful of. I had a teacher in my undergrad and master's, Richard Kilmer. I worked with him at Eastman and then Yale. And he used to talk to us very openly and very with a lot of sophistication about how he selects which students to bring into the studio, and the reasons for doing that being that he wants to cultivate a studio environment that is healthy, supportive, nurturing, collaborative. And I really absorbed that philosophy. So it's something that is incredibly important to me. So when a student comes and plays for me, I'm not just adjudicating them based on the quality of their musicianship. I'm also thinking about what is this student's interests? What kind of energy do they have in our interactions? How do I perceive this would work within this studio environment where the students are there to lift one another up and not bring this kind of ego forward energy that's more competitive and which can kind of create a little bit of a toxic vibe in the studio if you're not careful. So I think students that establish a rapport with the professor ahead of time through communication, lessons, meetings, stuff like that are going to be an advantage because I have a much better pool of data to draw from when I'm choosing who to bring into the studio.
Yeah, absolutely. And I get to be a fly on the wall in a couple of weeks for your studio, but I've never seen it yet. What does it feel like? What is the atmosphere of your studio?
Well, I wish some of my students here were to talk about that. I imagine if
they will be in a couple of weeks.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you came up to my office door and saw the door itself, I think that would give you a little bit of a sense of that. My students decorated my office door last semester as a surprise. And it's very playful. It's funny. It's also has some oboe pedagogical things there, which we can dive into if we're interested. But point is, I think it's a good reflection of what we're going for, which to me is the intersection between high standards in terms of one's musicianship and one's professionalism, but also within the context of something that is really embracing the fun of what we do and the collaborative nature of what we do, and the part of the process that is about deepening yourself as a being, right? Why do we ultimately do this? Like, what is the point of trying to get really good at the oboe? Yes, of course, there is absolutely the practical consideration of, I want to get a job someday. I want to be able to support myself financially. And that's something we talk about for sure. But I think it goes much deeper than that. Through the work you do on your craft, on your instrument, on your art form, you have to sort of discover yourself. You have to face yourself. You have to face your insecurities and your doubts, and you have to meet them head on. And you can use your process, your day-to-day work to help you do that. So I think it's a really powerful personal process that goes on when it comes to getting really good at an art form like music making, oboe playing. And I think the students really get that, and they get that I prioritize the part of that that is rooted in joy and creativity. And you would see, when you do come to studio class, you're going to see there's a lot of laughter, there's a lot of applause, there's a lot of, my students love to give each other snaps when they play. There's a very open-hearted, open-minded energy there, but not at the expense of really trying to get as good as you possibly can at this. I hope that all makes sense.
Yeah. Does competition play a role in your studio? Like, do they compete against each other? Or
well,
yeah.
On the most literal level, there is competition, right? They audition every semester for ensembles. And by nature, that is a form of competition. But I think they all know through my teaching and through our discussions that the competition, if we even want to call it that, really has to do with yourself, to figure out how to make your practice more productive, more mindful, more joyful, and that it really is ultimately about the process. This is something I talk to my students about a lot. I mean, of course, to be a successful professional musician, you do have to think about results. You have to think about winning the audition. And in order to get good at that, it might mean that entering competitions or applying for summer music festivals are a very useful part of that process. So there are going to be results that you have to deal with. You're going to get a yes or a no. Yeah. But the more you focus on the process, the more you focus on how do I make this process more engaging, more productive, more mindful, more enjoyable, I think the results organically flow out of that. And that's something I really teach my students. And as a result of that, I get the sense that they are not thinking about being competitive with one another at all. The only energy I see is them supporting one another. If a student, has a problem with their instrument, I've seen other students in the studio let them borrow their instrument for an indefinite period of time, or a backup instrument. Or if a student, has no reeds, or at a performance, another student will lend them one of their reeds without even thinking about it. That's just kind of built into the groundwater of the studio.
Yeah, how do you build that into the groundwater of the studio, like in the private lessons?
Yeah, well, I think number one, you got to lead by example, right? This is something I learned from my dad. My dad is the master of this, and he would, if he were here, he would, say, I don't know what you're talking about, right? Because for him, it is so innate that he's not even thinking about it. He just lives an empathetic, compassionate, supportive sort of life. That's how he treats when he was working, that's how he treated his coworkers, that's how he treats his friends, his family. And I very much absorbed that from him. So I tried to show my students how to move through the world as a musician and as a good citizen just by my actions, how I talk about my students. Like, I've noticed some teachers out there have a tendency, sometimes consciously, sometimes unconsciously, to play favorites, right? And they'll kind of play the students against one another. That's something that my students will never experience, because that's just antithetical to my being and my pedagogical approach, right? So my students see me treating them and their peers exactly the same, with the same degree of both insistence on quality, but unbelievable, unconditional supportiveness. They see me talking about and interacting with my colleagues in the same way. They see me bringing joy every single day to my work, regardless of what's going on. And I'll be honest with my students if I'm going through a hard time, like if I'm, concerned about the health of one of my pets or something like that, I'll share that with them because I think it is important that they see we are human beings, right? But they'll also see that I can still then bring this positive energy to the teaching and this very alive kind of crackling dynamic with the student, even when there's other stuff going on that I'm concerned about or stressed about. And I think that is a powerful message for them.
A very powerful message. So what kind of examples did your dad set? Can you think of any kind of example? As a father myself, I'm always interested when someone says they just did it right as a father, right? Because it's a hard job.
Yes. Well, I mean, there's several I can think of off the top of my head. Number one, and this is very practical, is always being on time and always being prepared. And my father, and sorry, there's a little bit of a minor swear word in this, but my dad had a saying that he still to this day loves saying all the time, and it is prior proper planning prevents piss poor performance. So he was my dad was an engineer, right? So he has a very, logical and rational kind of approach to things. And he really values the integrity. He really values being reliable and dependable. So, and my teacher in undergrad, Richard Kilmer, I mentioned, was also the same way. And he used to say, if you're not 30 minutes early, you're late. Oh, wow. Right? To rehearsals, concerts, stuff like that. So I had these two, mentors in my life, these two very impactful adults in my life that really stressed to me how important it is to be reliable, to be punctual. So that's more of a pragmatic. On a deeper level, my dad was a believer that you lead by example, which I mentioned, but also that there's never a need to express something to somebody with anger.
Okay.
He always kept a level head, even when, he was frustrated about something, but he always took the time to explain something and express something. And, if we needed discipline, my brother and I, it was always delivered not in a way where it felt scary and intimidating. It was always like, these were the rules. You broke them. These are the consequences. I still love you, but this is what needs to happen. And so I always felt really, really, really safe with him. And that's how I want my students to feel. I don't want my students to ever worry, what kind of mood is Dr. Parker going to be in today, right? Is he going to fly off the handle? I'm never going to fly off the handle.
Yeah.
I don't. That's just not in my DNA. If there is a situation that happens where a student has done something that really needs to be addressed, then I will do so and I'll be very clear about it. But I will never, raise my voice or use... I mean, there is such a thing as righteous anger, I suppose. And sometimes there's a use for that. You can say what you did really is inappropriate and it upset me, it disappointed me. But if you deliver that in a tone where the student knows you're still on their side, then I think it's 1,000 times more impactful than if you just lose your cool. And that's something my dad really taught me.
Yeah, that's when you were growing up with your teachers. Did you have similar teachers that would do that? Because this is interesting. A lot of people don't talk about this. Because classical music, especially for people not in the classical music world, there's always that thing of like the conductor throwing things and swearing at people and like you're done, get out right now. Yeah. So what was your experience growing up learning the instrument? Yeah, no,
that's a great question, and I think that brings up this sort of false dichotomy that exists that I've noticed that's still sort of pervasive in the classical music world, which is this notion that the only way you can get the best results from a student is if you use a fear-based and an intimidation-based approach, which I think is a very, very unsophisticated and limited way to think about teaching. I think you can help a student unlock their full potential with an approach that is very nurturing, very supportive, very caring, but still incisive. It's not an either or. Both things can exist at the same time. And I was very lucky, to answer your question, that I had a lot of teachers throughout my, I studied piano from the age of 4. I had a phenomenal piano teacher all through my kind of early years. I had choir directors. I had, multiple oboe teachers. I had amazing band directors. I was very lucky that I had a lot of role models. Yeah. But of course, I've had experiences with various conductors and other, adult.
No names.
No, of course not.
Yeah.
Other adult professionals that I've had to learn from or engage with, who were more like what you described, the fly off the handle and yelling and screaming and this or that. And what always comes to my mind is that saying that says, he who fails to hear a shout will strain to hear a whisper, right? Meaning, like, people are going to be much more inclined to listen to you and care about what you say if you don't lose your sort of integrity and authority with them through this kind of mindless screaming, which makes you just seem like you're, held in bondage by your own anger and insecurity, right? You lose your authority when you behave like that. Yeah. So I just don't think it's necessary. And if you asked my husband, he would say that he calls me the anthropomorphization of a golden retriever. Anger doesn't really kind of happen with me so much, but my students will tell you, there's probably been 1 or 2 times where I've had to have a little bit of a firmer conversation with them. I don't raise my voice, but when I say this, you can't do this anymore. And it's really powerful for them because I've earned a relationship with them that makes my kind of moral authority that much more striking.
No, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So how did you choose to play the oboe? So you play piano, you play choir, you like listed off a whole bunch of stuff.
I started piano when I was 5, and I asked my parents if I could take piano lessons. And that was pretty young to ask, but they weren't surprised. I mean, my parents, I don't remember this, but they loved to tell me the anecdote of when I was 2 years old, they gave me a Fisher-Price xylophone for Christmas or something, or my birthday, I don't remember. But they said I would just sit there and figure out melodies on it by ear. So it was obvious that I had a musical inclination of some sort. And so I started playing piano when I was 5, and then I joined the church choir. So I was very engaged with music from a very young age. And then in 4th grade, because this was back when band started in 4th grade. Yeah. We went to the petting zoo, the instrument petting zoo, where you got to go listen to all the instruments, have them presented to you. And if you wanted to be in band, you get to choose your instrument. And I chose the oboe. And, I've answered this question so many times over the years that I don't remember what the actual truth of why I chose that. Maybe, it could be as simple, it may be just very abstract. I maybe just liked something about the way it sounded. I do remember that the band director said it was a very difficult instrument. And I think I was always, from a young age, somebody who liked being challenged. So I think I might have been drawn to it for that. But what I often tell people was that I wanted to learn how to charm snakes. You remember the old cartoons when they'd play the oboe? Exactly. Yeah. And that image was in me. So I think there was a lot about the oboe that sort of, just spoke to me on some sort of subconscious level. And I was drawn to it for reasons that I can't really explain consciously now, but it just made sense. And I loved it right from the start. I really, really did. But piano was always my primary instrument all the way through middle school and in high school. It wasn't until I was very serious about piano. I did competitions. I went to music festivals for piano. And I was involved in oboe. I was in band. I was in the youth orchestra, but piano was my primary thing. And it wasn't until my senior year in high school that changed. And it was because I met, this is a good example of how powerful one person can be in your life in terms of maybe changing the direction things head. At that point in time, I grew up in the Tampa Bay area in Florida. And at that point in time, the principal oboe of the Florida Orchestra was a woman named Jeanette Bitar. And everybody, I mean, we used to go, my buddies in the youth orchestra and I used to go to the Florida Orchestra concerts all the time. We were really into it. And everybody loved Jeanette Bitar's playing. She was really like held up as like an incredible artist in the orchestra. So I was very, I admired her a great deal and I was very intimidated by her. And I was kind of like, I would love to. And at that point, I wasn't taking oboe lessons anymore. I just didn't have time with all the stuff.
Really?
I was still playing it, but I
wow.
wasn't taking lessons. And my youth orchestra at the end of my junior year of high school got to do a side-by-side concert with the Florida Orchestra.
Wow.
And I was principal oboe in the youth orchestra, so I got to sit next to Jeanette Bitar. And I remember...
No pressure,
No,
right?
I mean, I was excited and terrified, all of that. And there was a solo coming up, and I don't remember what the repertoire was, but there was an oboe solo coming up. And I was just sitting there, and I'm like, am I supposed to play this? Is Jeanette going to play it? Or Miss Bitar, right?
Yeah.
Going to play this. And like a little bit before we were about to get to the solo, she turns to me and she goes, you play it. And I was like, okay. So then I played the solo. And then...
How'd it go?
I think fine.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I don't really remember, but what happened was when we got to the break or the end of the rehearsal, Jeanette turned to me and she said, I think you're an oboe player. She said, I don't like to teach. I'm not very much into teaching, but I would love to work with you.
Wow.
And I was just like,
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God. And this was right at the end of my junior year. So then I told her, I said, oh my gosh, I would love to. That would be incredible. I said, I'm about to leave in a couple weeks to go to a summer, like a 7-week long summer music camp for high schoolers up in Vermont for piano. And she said, you're a pianist? And I said, yeah. And she goes, that's wonderful. But if you come study with me, you're going to have to quit piano.
Oh, wow.
She said, because I'm going to get you to the level where you can get into a top tier music school for college, but you're going to have to dedicate all of your time to the oboe. She said, go to your festival, have a wonderful time, think about it. And when you get back, if you decide you want to do that, call me.
Wow.
Yeah. So I went to the festival.
For 7 weeks, you played piano nonstop.
Yeah.
And
I did play Little Oboe too.
Okay.
Which was...
You smuggled it in?
Well, I this was my second summer going to that festival, and I had gotten to play Little Oboe the first summer too. But I was definitely there for piano primarily. But there were a couple times where there was like orchestra pieces that needed more oboes. And so I would come in and play, fourth oboe on something. So that summer I had a wonderful time, and I don't know why. It's like she planted a seed in me, and I just was like, I really want to do this. It sounds amazing. So I got back, I quit piano, which my piano teacher she understood, but she was very sad, because we had established such a good energy over years.
Was it the same teacher that you started with?
No, not the same one, but this was somebody I'd been studying with now at this point for pretty much my entire high school career.
Okay.
And I started taking lessons with Jeanette, and I was her only student. I would go over to her house on Saturdays. And I would stay there for like 3 or 4 hours. My mom would drive me, like it was almost an hour drive from my house.
Yeah.
And I would stay there. My mom would wait out in the car. I mean, talk about having supportive parents, right?
Yeah.
And
for 4 hours.
Yeah. And at that time, Jeanette was married to Michael Stern, who's a very famous conductor. He's the music director of the Kansas City Symphony. And he's the son of Isaac Stern, the very famous violinist. So that was, for me, like, I was suddenly getting a bird's eye view of like the professional classical music world. It was very exciting, very scary.
Music royalty.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was very exciting, very scary, very wonderful. And I would just spend hours working on repertoire. And I practiced oboe so much that whole, that was the fall semester of my senior year of high school. And that's a large part of the reason why I was able to get into to Eastman, which is where I ultimately went to do my undergrad, was because of the work I did with Jeanette and because of all the practicing I did I really kind of made my life all about the oboe at that point in time. So good example of how one shouldn't take being a mentor for granted, because you never know what kind of impact you're going to have on a young person.
Yeah. What would you suggest to like someone who's maybe a junior in high school who's like, that's the experience I want. I want to get into a top tier university, but they don't quite, have that person. How do you find that person?
Yeah, well, if the student has a teacher, a private teacher, start there, right? Ask the private teacher, what are schools or teachers I should be looking at for, potentially for my collegiate education. And like I mentioned before, that's the time to start reaching out to those teachers and introducing yourself. I have my students send teachers like videos of themselves playing and stuff like that. If there's a video of a performance that they're particularly proud of, so that the teacher can start to get a sense of how that student plays and what they're working on, and then they can sort of track their progress over time. And if the high school student doesn't have a private teacher, then, maybe that's time to like talk to your band director or any other musical mentors you have in your life. And if you don't even have that, then that's that time for a little bit of Google Mancy. Sit down, start looking at, good music programs in my state, in my area and beyond. And then look, and if they, once you find out who the teacher is there, then go onto YouTube or Spotify. Does that teacher have recordings? Do they have live videos? Have they written any books? And start to get to know that teacher's musicianship and pedagogy. And if that resonates with you, then reach out, introduce yourself. Don't wait. Every once in a while, almost every student that auditions for me, I've met before because they've reached out and come taken a lesson or at least had a meeting or something. But every once in a while, there's a couple students that just show up and have never introduced themselves. And sometimes it's even students that live right here in Austin.
Oh, wow. Really?
And yeah. And of course, I don't penalize them for that, but I always wonder why, why, if this was a school you were interested in and I'm a teacher you were interested in working with, why didn't you ever reach out and at least introduce yourself or come take a lesson? Because it's going to make it so much easier for you to make a decision about where you're going to go to school if you have information, if you've gotten to know that teacher and how they teach and whether or not you have a good dynamic with them. That's going to make that decision so much easier and clearer, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And just in life in general, that's always a good thing, to reach out and talk to people.
Be proactive. Be 100%. And I know that's hard. It is hard. Yeah. I get it. And it's hard for me even sometimes. So what I tell my students to do is sit down, like choose a time a time in the week when is normally a more relaxed time, like maybe a Sunday evening. If that's a time where you tend to like not have a lot you're doing and you're just kind of relaxing, and sit down with a notebook or a computer, scrap paper, whatever works for you, and write down a list of things you can do, seeds you can plant. And this can go beyond just like being proactive about college and professionalization and all that. This can be a good life skill to have. There's this book I've always wanted to read. I've never read it, so put that on the list. I'm going to reach out to X, Y, and Z. I'm going to look up this teacher on YouTube. I'm going to cook a meal I've never cooked before. Whatever it is, have fun with this. Brainstorm. Think of cool activities. I'm going to call this friend I haven't spoken to. It can be anything. And then pick one or two or three of those things and do them that week and follow through. Set goals and follow through, and make that sort of a ritual that you do every week or month, whatever. You can decide what it looks like. But I think that helps with that sort of indecision, paralysis that a lot of us get, or that difficulty with being proactive, if you just sit down and are organized in that process, I think it can make a difference.
Yeah, amazing. And speaking of you were talking about listening to people's recordings and stuff. You have some recordings, so let's talk about your let's start with the one that came out in October, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yes, great transition, by the way. That was very tastefully done. So I had an album come out in October. And it's called From the Sea to the Stars. It was produced by Parma Recordings. And this album...
Is that Parma in like Italy? Is it
it's
Parma?
The same name, but the recording studios are... I actually don't know where they're located right now.
There's a Parma in Ohio too, maybe.
I think it's somewhere on the East Coast. We can figure that out. But they're a wonderful company. I've actually produced now. The recording I have coming out in February was also produced by them as well. They were terrific to work with. The staff was incredibly helpful and fun and easy to communicate with. So anyway, the album, like I said, is called From the Sea to the Stars. It's a collaboration with one of my closest friends in the entire world, Lindsay Flowers, who is the oboe professor at University of Wisconsin-Madison. She and I met at the Aspen Music Festival back in 2009. And we were there together every summer for 4 summers. And we hit it off right from the start. And we used to get together and play duets and make reads and hang out and do all kinds of stuff together. And we formed a really, really good both friendship and professional relationship at that time. And then years later, she won the English horn job in the orchestra I play with. I've been the principal oboe in the Quad City Symphony Orchestra for 16 years.
Oh, wow. Still?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I fly up there and play Masterworks concerts with them. And, so my previous job, sorry, this is a bit of a tangent, but my previous job before I started here at UT was at the University of Iowa. Okay. And that's in Iowa City, which is an hour drive from Quad Cities. So the year I started at Iowa, the principal oboe job in Quad Cities was open. So I auditioned for that and got it.
Wow.
So I played there while I was teaching at Iowa. And then when I got this job and moved here, I had formed a really good rapport with the music director there, Mark Russell Smith. So they worked out a really nice deal for me to be able to keep coming back and playing there. And I've been doing that now for 10 years.
Wow.
And I've played several concertos with them and done several solo recitals and stuff. So it's been a really fruitful and wonderful collaboration. So Lindsay was the English horn in that orchestra for a couple of seasons. So we got to reconnect professionally through that. And then when she got the job in Madison, she called me and, one of the things we have to do as professors, we do have to do, but also want to do is make recordings. It's part of how we're adjudicated for the tenure process, right? So Lindsay called me and said, how would you feel about making a recording together, some sort of duo album? And I said, absolutely, because she and I have you meet these people in life that you have this kind of like artistic kinship with, where when you play with them, it's just very easy. You kind of hear things very similarly. You express things similarly. Your sense of intonation is really lined up. And it's just like, you don't even have to think about it to play with them. That's how it has always been with Lindsay. So I was like, I'd love to do a recording with you. So then we started researching because we wanted to do a lot of pieces that were written by, composers from non-traditional backgrounds.
Okay.
We wanted to do pieces that were
like modern or like historical.
Both.
Okay.
Both. But there are 3 works on the album. There's 5 works on the album total. 3 of them are by living composers who all happen to be women. And then 2 of the works are by composers that are not alive anymore. Who are, one of them, Eugene Boat's a very famous composer. And then the other one is a lesser well-known classical composer, Federico Fiorillo, who wrote a duo concertante for 2 oboes and piano. So those 2 pieces are a little bit more sort of, I don't know if the word traditional is exactly right, but a little more maybe standard. Mm-hmm. And then the other 3 works by the living composers are all much more recently composed. And so we really wanted to kind of expose those to the oboe world and the classical music world at large. So because we think they're all great pieces of music and really fascinating. And so the title From the Sea to the Stars comes from the specificity of the repertoire. The first piece on the album is called Daughter of the Sea, which is by Andrea Clearfield, and that was written in 2013. And then the last piece is a movement from Bozza's Shepherds of Provence, which is, and it's called Beneath the Stars. So you have Daughter of the Sea and Beneath the Stars as sort of the bookends of the album, which is where we got From the Sea to the Stars from. And a lot of the music on the album does celebrate very overtly, or at least point to the natural world, right? And we kind of think of as that first piece on the album, Daughter of the Sea, as kind of the signature piece of the album because it is a very substantial work. It's a 7-movement work. It's it's on the longer side. And what makes it particularly interesting is that it has several techniques required of the musicians. It's for oboe and English horn. And it has several techniques required of the oboist and English hornists that go beyond just playing the instrument. For example, we have to sing in it.
Oh, wow.
And we have to sing very difficult intervals. It's actually quite challenging.
Thank goodness you did that church choir back.
Exactly. Yes. And we have to do like various techniques on the instrument, like kind of slap tonguing on the reed wells. We have to make different sound effects with our voices. So there's a lot to it. And in fact, it's meant to be performed with a certain amount of choreography too, which obviously we can't capture on an audio recording. But it's a kind of a theatrical work in a way. And it's also
like what kind of choreography?
Just like kind of walking out on stage in a certain way and then somebody leaving the stage. There's specific instructions surrounding how you get on and off the stage and things like that. But it's a quite difficult piece. It's a beautiful piece. It's a fascinating piece. We really believe in it. And there's a text for it that I believe is based on Pablo Neruda poetry. So and
this is what is sung?
Yep. Yeah. This is what a lot of the singing we have to do in it is that text. In the score, the singing is technically optional. Andrea does give you the option of playing those pitches instead, but then you don't have the text present. So I think the singing of it really adds such a amount of depth to it. So yeah, the album is entirely works for either 2 oboes and piano, or oboe English horn and piano, or just oboe and English horn.
Did you play the piano?
I did not.
Okay.
We had a third collaborator come in, and whose name is Satoko, and she played the piano with us and did a wonderful, wonderful job. And we had a lot of fun recording it. We recorded it. Now it's been 3 years since we recorded it, but the process of recording, editing, and producing it's a process that takes quite a bit of time.
Did you do it up there or down here? Or?
We recorded it in Madison.
Okay.
Yeah, we recorded it up in Madison in one of the recital halls there. It was beautiful. And we did it over the summer, and Madison in the summer is a beautiful, beautiful place. So we had a lot of fun.
Much nicer than Austin in the summer.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up in Florida, so I don't mind the heat as much. But yeah, I grew
up in Cleveland, so the summers are hard.
Yeah. That I can understand for sure. But so that was my album. It's an album that both Lindsay and I feel extremely proud of. We worked really hard on it. I really believe in the music on the album. You know, in addition to the Daughter of the Sea piece, there's also a piece by Alyssa Morris, who's a really, really well-known composer of oboe literature, who is a professor of oboe. And there's also, I mentioned the piece by Federico Fiorillo. If you are hungering for something a little bit more kind of in the style of Mozart, right? It's a really fun piece for 2 oboes, has a lot of flashy, virtuosic sort of passages. I think people will have a ton of fun with that as well.
Awesome. And is there any plans to have like a concert, like the concert version of it?
Yes. Well, we have already had a proposal accepted to perform at the International Double Reed Society conference this summer in June. So we're planning on performing you only get to do a 25-minute recital. So, and that's about the length of the Andrea Clearfield. So we're going to perform that piece. And we're also currently planning a Texas tour.
Nice.
We're going to do a performance here and hopefully also at Baylor and UNT. So we're that's still in the works, ironing that out, but we're going to do a kind of a CD release tour.
Nice.
Yeah.
And how do people get the album? Is it like on Spotify or do they buy the physical album?
No, there are no physical copies.
Okay.
So if you go to, if you just Google From the Sea to the Stars, Parma, you'll get to the site for the album, and it's available on any streaming services: YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, Amazon, all of that. So you can access it that way.
Awesome. And then you have another, not an album, but another recording coming out in a couple months, right?
Less than that, like a couple weeks at this point.
Weeks,
mid-February. Yeah. It's this is another collaboration that I did with my colleagues here at the Butler School of Music.
Okay.
Kristen Wolf-Jensen, our illustrious bassoon professor, and the great Colette Valentine, the head of the collaborative piano program here. I've gotten to my great delight, perform with and collaborate with them on multiple occasions over the years. So we decided to record this great piece of music. It's a really fun, really cool, relatively substantial. It's about 25 minutes long. Chamber piece. It's called the Grand Trio for Oboe, Bassoon, and Piano by Marie de Grandval. She was a composer in the 1800s. We don't have a ton of repertoire, at least that we know of. I'm sure it exists, but we don't have a ton of repertoire from that time period by women composers for that instrumentation.
Of any time period, really.
Yeah.
But I mean, a little better now. Right. Very, very recently. But yeah.
Absolutely. You're totally correct about that. And we discovered this work and got together and read it and fell in love with it right away. It's really charming. It's beautiful. It has moments of virtuosity in it. It's kind of a crowd pleaser piece too, which is not always super common for chamber music with oboe. Yeah. It's one of those pieces that an audience is going to really respond to and really be excited about. And we actually performed it here last year when Professor Wolf-Jensen and I hosted a double reed extravaganza.
Oh, yeah.
And to our great delight, we got a shockingly large audience to come to the thing, and we got to perform this piece. And we also collaborated on that concert with Professor Burritt, our amazing percussion faculty, who played a piece for us that was written for our ensemble for oboe, bassoon, and marimba. But anyway, so that piece that we played, the Marie de Grandval Grand Trio, we decided to record it a couple years ago. And so we're releasing that as a single also through Parma.
Nice.
Same. And that's coming out in a couple of weeks. And it will also be available on all those same streaming services.
That's great. I know the concert you did. I mean, I didn't put it together that you were on that concert. But, doing the marketing and publicity here, I know we've aired that on KMFA several times.
Yeah.
And that's always a big requested one. I
Really?
feel like that's been, I don't want to say that it's been more than any other concert, but that one's aired many times on KMFA.
The oboe, bassoon, piano trio?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Not the recording, the actual.
The live.
Yeah, it was recorded.
Yeah.
The live was recorded, but that's a big, crowd pleaser, I guess.
That's great.
KMFA, which is our local classical music station here.
Oh, that's one. I didn't even know that. That's really cool. And I also put some of that. I put not the whole performance, but I put the third and fourth movements of that live performance are also on YouTube.
Oh, nice.
So you can watch. So you can listen to our recording, and then you can also watch part of that piece performed by us in a live performance setting as well. And And I really, the cool thing about the piece is that it's one of those pieces that serious collegiate undergraduate students can learn and work on. But it's also not, I mean, it's not easy. It's not super difficult. It's not easy. It's in a really good sweet spot of difficulty where it's going to give you some good work to do, but it's not going to, be brain busting.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's fun and beautiful. And like I said, it's one of those pieces that an audience is going to, as you've kind of indicated, that an audience is going to respond very positively to.
That's awesome. And we'll put all the links down below. So
Perfect.
So feel free to go and listen, and awesome. So anything else?
Well, the other thing I'll say is that I do have a performance coming up in the end of April.
Well, that's right. Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to play the Legacy Concerto by Oscar Navarro in Hong Kong with the Hong Kong Wind Philharmonia.
Wow.
And Jerry Junkin will be conducting. So, and this will be my third time collaborating with him on this incredible and difficult and fun and another very crowd pleasing sort of piece. I've played it here at UT, and that video is actually on YouTube. And I also played it with the Dallas Wind Symphony last year, and now I'm going to be playing it in Hong Kong. So very cool piece, very recently composed, very cinematic. It sounds a lot like a movie score, very virtuosic. So I think that's the kind of thing that listeners of this podcast might be interested in seeking out. I think I've never met a student that didn't love that piece. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I know. I wish I could go hear it. So, and Jerry's just such a phenomenal, he just did the Circus Maximus.
Yes.
And just seeing him conduct with like the different, like four,
yes.
and and all over the hall. It's just, I don't know how anybody can do it.
He's a master of his craft. There's no doubt about that. He's a great colleague. I really appreciate the support he's shown me and the friendship he's shown me over the years. So I'm looking forward to having my first adventure in China with Jerry Junkin.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll show you around a little bit. Right?
Absolutely.
I'm sure he'll know the right restaurants.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And hopefully the late night, like the street food markets. I'm really excited about that. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming in and sitting down. We're excited about everything. I encourage everyone to go listen to all the links down below, and we can't wait to see what else comes next semester, right? You've had a busy year.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that, and it's been a pleasure to chat with you.